Miss Sherwood, did your family come with you? Giselle was puzzled by the doctor question. Wasn't it just a medical report? Did she need someone to accompany her? Besides, family, what family did she have left? Her mother died during childbirth. Her father treated her as a money-making tool, and her brother blamed her for their mother's death and hated her to death. As for her lover, they got married because of an agreement. If the doctor hadn't mentioned the word suddenly, she would have almost forgotten what family meant. After a moment of hesitation, Giselle shook her head and said, I came alone. The doctor frowned and sighed heavily, handed Giselle a stack of test reports. Ms. Sherwood, the test results are out. You have advanced gastric cancer. He seemed to pity this young woman who had been diagnosed with a terminal illness at such a young age, speaking and acting carefully. Giselle's breathing faltered. She took the test report and frowned. The doctor pointed to the images and explained them to Giselle one by one. Giselle was absent-minded, listening to some and missing some, but she concluded that she didn't have much time left and needed to be admitted for chemotherapy as soon as possible. How long can people with advanced gastric cancer live? Giselle knew better than anyone else about this disease. Because her grandfather struggled with it on his deathbed for 2 years before passing away. The doctor kindly suggested, Miss Sherwood, we recommend that you be hospitalized for treatment as soon as possible. Can I be cured if I am hospitalized? Giselle's voice was hoarse. Her expression numb, as if she was talking to herself. The doctor did not speak again, just shook his head in embarrassment. So there was no cure. Giselle licked her dry lips and stood up, stuffing the diagnosis report into her shoulder bag. She said thank you and walked out of the diagnosis room without looking back. After leaving the hospital, it was raining outside, with the drizzle mixed with cold wind, which felt like a knife scraping against Giselle's face. She opened her bag and took out an umbrella. But the fine rain was so slanting that even with the umbrella, it couldn't ward off the cold. Her fingers turned red from the cold, and she held the umbrella with one hand while clenching the other hand into a fist and putting it into her pocket. But she still felt that no matter how she covered herself, she couldn't get warm. Giselle walked aimlessly, turning the ring on her ring finger, looking at the overcast sky. Spring was supposed to be the season of vitality, but how come she was going to die in this season? Giselle stood on the roadside and hailed a taxi. When the taxi pulled over, she closed her umbrella and got into the car. The driver turned his head and asked her, where to? 2670 Chestnut Route, Giselle replied, looking down. After driving for a while, Giselle couldn't help but open her bag and look at the picture in the diagnostic report. It was hard to believe that the twisted and ugly stomach in the picture was a part of her body. Her stomach cancer was caused by hunger. In the 4 years of marriage with Jensen Lindstrom, she tried her best to make the food that he favored to please him, hoping that he would be moved by the table full of food when he came back, and even if he didn't like her, he would be kinder to her. But Jensen didn't even want to have a meal with her. She wasn't discouraged and still made food every day, sending him messages that told him she would wait for him. And this waiting, instead of waiting for him, brought her stomach cancer. In the end, Giselle couldn't control her tears any longer. She took a deep breath, thinking she was tough enough to handle anything that came her way. But today, all of the facade of her strength crumbled, and her stomach convulsed as she curled up and shuddered, her teeth tightly clenched, producing a low moan. Hearing her sobs, the driver looked up at the rearview mirror and saw the woman curled up and shaking with a thin, weak back. It seemed like she was taking all the air out of the car. He had never seen anyone cry so desperately before. Miss, what's wrong? There was no answer from the back seat. He continued, there's no hurdle that can't be overcome. Be optimistic. Crying won't solve anything. Go back and rest well. Tomorrow will be a brand new day. Giselle raised her head, a bitter smile on her lips. Thank you. She never expected that after being diagnosed with a terminal illness, the first person to comfort her would be a stranger. The driver smiled and didn't say anything else. After arriving at the apartment building, he parked the car in a temporary parking spot. Giselle paid the driver and then got off the car. She tore up the diagnosis paper in her hand and throwing it into the trash. A cold wind blew, and Giselle wiped the tears from her face, once again becoming the woman with her usual calm demeanor. Despite her slightly swollen eyes and her pale face. Exhausted, Giselle climbed the stairs and fumbled for her keys. She turned the key and opened the door, instantly waking her up to the different atmosphere in the room. Through the door, she heard the sound of someone on the phone. Jensen was back.